So when you talk to someone who's not into hi-fi, and you show them this component, you say, "This is my DAC." Usually they kind of stare at you blankly and say, "What is a DAC?" And then you have to go in and you have to explain what a digital to analog converter does. And if you don't have a computer science degree or a math degree, it can get pretty confusing about how exactly a digital to analog converter takes ones and zeros and turns it into an analog waveform. And certainly my knowledge base only goes so far, and I don't fully comprehend how this stuff happens. But what I do know is there are several different architectures for the way in which those digits are converted to an analog waveform. And one of the hottest versions of that's been very popular over the last, let's say, 10 years or so is the R2R DAC. And what is an R2R DAC? So as far as I understand it, R2R basically got its name from resistors that are an R value and a double that R value, so an R and a 2R. So it used to be called R/2R, but then it sort of got abbreviated to R2R. And it's also known as a resistor ladder DAC, and it gets that name because of the way the resistors are laid out on the board. It looks like a ladder with rungs on it. And ladder DACs can be made of discrete components, and what I mean by discrete components is that they are actual resistors soldered on a board of different values. Or they can actually do R2R in a chipset itself. So it's in a piece of silicon and it does the same thing. It just does it all within the chipset. And the hottest thing right now is this discrete version of an R2R DAC in which you have resistors in a ladder pattern on the board that converts ones and zeros to a value. The combination of those values leading up to what the analog signal is at any one particular sample moment. And what's important about these is that they were highly reliant on very precision matched resistors. So those resistors have to be very, very tight tolerances and match each other very, very closely. Otherwise, you end up with distortion at the analog waveform, which is what no one wants. So, they can be fairly labor intensive because you have to sort of measure each resistor and know what its true value is and match them up accordingly. So, the R2R DACs are very popular right now. So, this is all in preparation for what I'm going to talk about today, which is the Audio GD R8 MKII DAC. And Audio GD has a number of different DACs out there, most of which, at least on the upper end of their line, are R2R DACs. And so this is a fully balanced DAC, and it has a number of digital inputs, which we'll go over. And it has a few interesting settings that you can get into that affect the sound in ways that sort of off the shelf chipsets don't allow you to do very much. Now this is also a field programmable gate array DAC, I believe, What those FPGAs are doing, I'm not entirely sure. Um, but I know that the software, in much the same way that PS Audio's original Wave DAC, I think, was able to, through software updates, make a lot of changes. I think this is kind of the same thing. Although, as far as I know, there's only been maybe one firmware update to this DAC, which I have not done. Now, Audio GD also has a newer version of this DAC. This is the MK2. I believe they're on an MK3 now. So the MK3 has a slightly different chassis, which I'll be honest, looks a lot nicer than the one I have. And I think, there's a few other options with that DAC. The ability to add an external clock is one of them. I currently don't have the ability to do that. And I think Audio GD makes external reclockers and things that you can hook up to this DAC. So where this DAC fits in the lineup is it's the second from the top. So the top, I think, is the R7. Their nomenclature sometimes doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I think it's the R7 balanced, or HE or something, is the very, very top of the line. I think that's, somewhere around $4,000. And the R8, at least my version when I bought it, was somewhere around 1,800. I bought mine new from Underwood Hi-Fi, which is basically the distributor slash dealer for the US for Audio GD. And if you don't know who Audio GD is, they are a small Chinese manufacturer, and unusual in that they both design and manufacture all their gear. Most Chinese firms make things for other people, and they might do that too. I don't know, but they do have a very talented designer who is working on creating all of their components. And in that way, it's similar to a Denafrips or a Kinky Studio. Those are also Chinese owned, Chinese designed, and Chinese manufactured components. So very similar to that. And we'll get to this sound in a future video of this. And I know many of you are going to say, "Oh, how does this compare to the Denafrips Pontus, or whatever flavor Denafrips there is out there?" And to be honest, I haven't heard anything from Denafrips, I haven't heard a lot of DACs, to be quite honest. Most of the DACs I have heard are in the lower end price ranges. I haven't heard a lot of DACs that are in this sort of above $1,500 price range on a long-term basis. I've heard the Hollow Audio Spring DAC. I've heard the Tambuki DAC for a little bit, but these are short auditions, so I can't really give you any kind of real insight into how it compares to those. However, what I am able to compare it to is something I do own, which is an ELAC Discovery, and that's in my living room system. ELAC Discovery is a small unit that is both a streamer and a DAC. And I brought it down to the listing room down here and made a comparison to the Audio GD R8. And we'll get into those sound comparisons a little bit later. But right now, let's go through the operation of it, and then we'll take a closer look at the dimensions and take a look at this thing a little closer. Okay, so here it is, the R8 MKII DAC from Audio GD. And the functions are pretty simple. There's not a lot to screw around with on this. There's the power button, obviously. Then there's a button labeled setting, and then there's a selector button, a left and a right selector button. And then you got a numerical display, which is somewhat confusing, somewhat not. So the first digit is the input number that you're on. The second digit in this MK2 version is not used. I think in later versions they give you the option of an external clock, and that is a way I think that you can turn that external clock on and off in subsequent iterations of this DAC. And then the last three digits are the bit rate that you are using, or in this case what was just previously played was 48 kilohertz. So at a basic level you can switch the inputs. Right now we're on input 1. You can see that changes to input 2, which is BNC. RCA, input 3. Optical is input 4. 5 is I2S. 6 is USB. And then it cycles back to 1. And you can go, left or right, up or down. The current input that I'm using is AES out of the Bricasti M5 streamer, which is just above the DAC there. When we get into the settings, it gets a little more confusing. So when you push the setting button, you can see that there's now numerical display, same number of digits, but they're saying different things. So obviously if you let it go, it goes back to the default display. But this first digit is whether you're doing oversampling or non-oversampling. So when you hit the setting button and you click over, see, this is where it gets confusing, because the selector left goes left and the setting button goes right. So that's a little confusing. And then the selector button right is the thing that actually changes the setting. So the 0 here now means this is oversampling. And the next digit over, this 8, means it's 8 times oversampling. And you can use this button to go back to 0 times oversampling, 2 times oversampling, 4, or 8. And then you have this third display button, which looks like a 5, but is actually an S right now. An S is a setting that simulates a turntable, is the idea there. And I think the idea is it sort of smooths out and warms up the sound. I would guess through digital filtering. I don't know that for sure. So that's a guess. This is a field programmable gate array DAC. So there's lots of software things that you can do in these. And so if we change this setting, it can go from non-simulation to simulation. And then this digit is not used, and this digit basically can tell the display to turn off after a certain time period or to stay on all the time. And on my preamp, I leave that display so it turns off after a number of seconds. On this one, I like to keep it on because it's nice to be able to just check what resolution you're playing at. It's just informational, but I sort of like to know that. So yeah, that is the basics of this. The footers that you're seeing are aftermarket footers that I bought in that sort of gold color. But other than that, there's not anything else to really play with.
But your love's hurting kind. Yeah, your love's hurting kind. Oh, what a wicked joke that's getting played on me. I won your willing heart and all its cruelty. Oh, I know, love is hard to find, but your
Okay, so let's go through some basic anatomy of this DAC. It's quite deep. The cabinet itself is about 17 and a half, more like 18 and a quarter with the RCAs sticking out the back. Its width is 17, and its height, including the feet, is a little short of 3.5 inches. Yeah. And in terms of connections on the back, what we've got is a left and a right outputs in both XLR and RCA, plus this ACCS terminal, which is a current mode output that is similar to one that Krell used a while back. And Audio GD uses this on a number of different components. I think all of which are solid state though. So for instance, my preamp is a tube preamp, and so it does not have these inputs. So I have these outputs, but I can't really use them. But there are other components within their line that you can use that, and they claim a number of advantages to using those. But I've not tried them. And then you've got your digital inputs, and so we've got AES, which is a balanced connection, BNC, coax is input 3, input 4 is optical, I think that's right there. 5 is I2S, which is an HDMI, and if you look at the manual, they give you very specific requirements for what the pins do in the HDMI. So I'm not sure how those correspond to streamers and things that have an I2S output on HDMI. So I can't really comment on that. I haven't really tried it. And input 6 over here is of course your USB connection. And then additionally, there's an update port. And this is for firmware updates. I think you have to sort of buy this kind of dongle that fits into the port that contains, a USB output that you then connect and upload the new firmware into it. I have not used this. Like I said, I think there's been one update that's actually occurred. And I have not done it. I think you'll find in the latest edition of the R8, there is a clock input somewhere on the back of this that you can use an external clock to connect to this, but the MKII version doesn't have that. So that's the basics. I'm not going to open the top on this because there's a little sticker on here that basically tells the manufacturer if you've gotten in there, screwed anything up. And since I did buy this new, I think my warranty is probably still good. So I'm not going to mess with that. I will post some of the pictures from the manufacturer's website that show the internals on this thing. It's not empty. Audio GD spends a lot of effort and real estate on a good power supply, which takes up, a good front third of this entire DAC. So it's a big chassis, and it's a big chassis for a reason.